Stitch mount. Understanding twisted or turned stitches. Let's begin. When it comes to remembering stitch mount, I think of my stitches as little people that I herd back and forth on my needles. If everything is going well, the people face to the left. That means that their right leg is in front of the needle and their left leg is behind the needle. Some people look at it from a broader perspective, taking the surrounding stitches into account. In this case, the leg that is in the front of the needle is attached to the other stitch to the right. So if you pull on that front leg, it'll shorten the strand between the two stitches to the right. Also, the strand or left leg behind the needle is attached to the left stitch, or to the stitch to the left of the stitch you're currently working on. So if you tug on that leg, it shortens the strand of yarn between the two stitches, the one to the left. So if you make your stitches correctly, then your stitches will face the right direction. How then do stitches end up looking the other way? The number one mistake is that the knitter has wrapped the yarn the wrong way around. For knits and purls, the yarn is always wrapped in a counterclockwise motion. And for those who only have digital clocks, this means from right to left behind the needle, around and back toward the right. If you wrap the stitch clockwise, you will notice that your stitch is facing backwards. Another way to end up with your stitches facing backward is to knit through the back loop, which is a valid stitch when desired. But when it's not desired, it makes a twisted or turned stitch. This is what it looks like. You normally knit into that leg that is in front of the needle. But if you knit into the back leg of the stitch, you'll end up with a stitch whose legs are crossed. Like that. For continental knitters, twisted stitches often happen when purling. So I'll switch to continental here. So this is how you make a correct stitch using a continental purling method, by going counterclockwise around the needle. However, if you go clockwise around the needle, you'll end up with a stitch where the right leg is behind the needle and the left leg is in front. So the stitch is twisted. Another way of ending up with twisted stitches is if your needles fall out of your work, and then your stitches ladder down the front of your piece. When you're picking up your stitches, you have to make sure that your stitches are correctly mounted on your needle, or you'll end up with stitches that are twisted further down in your project. So how can you tell if you have a twisted stitch? If you're having a hard time telling if your stitches are twisted, pull gently at the sides of your knitting, and you'll notice that the twisted stitches have their legs crossed and look tighter, where the regular stitches have their legs parallel. So right here is a perfect example of this. These stitches, though uneven and irregular, all end up parallel because there is a part between the two stitch legs all the way down the row. However, when you spread this part, The stitch legs are parallel, and then all of a sudden they start to cross for 3 stitches. These stitches are twisted. Twisted stitches will have their legs crossed instead of parallel, and they'll look tighter. How do you fix a twisted stitch? Well, there are 2 types of twisted stitches. The first one is twisted with the front leg, what should be the front leg or right leg, behind the needle. So to fix this one, I just knit into that back leg and the stitch ends up being straight. Now, if your stitch is twisted the other way, that won't work. What you have to do is slip the stitch knitwise, which gets the stitch in the correct orientation, right leg in front, left leg in back, and then you slip the stitch purlwise back onto your stitch holding needle and work the stitch as you regularly would with your working needle. So there you have it, stitch mount, understanding twisted or turned stitches.